Hey, welcome to episode 15 of the Ascendancy podcast. I'm Austin,
I'm Chris.
and on today's episode, we're going to be talking about crop debts, specifically how they're an invalid argument against veganism. So, crop debts as an argument against veganism was popularized maybe 7 years ago now by a guest on Joe Rogan, Ted Nugent, who claimed that like 40,000 gophers are slaughtered per acre of crop farming, something like this. But it was just a grossly exaggerated and strawman argument against veganism. And this is just used so that way people think it's a gotcha and they don't have to examine veganism critically. But starting out, what is veganism? Veganism is a principle that animals shouldn't be exploited by humans. And what exactly is this argument? It's that many small animals and insects are killed during crop harvesting and land clearing for monocrop agriculture. Therefore, vegans are hypocrites and still kill animals. Now, this, at face value, when we steelman this position, is what's known as a straw man argument. It doesn't argue against veganism or the framework of veganism head on, and instead it uses this tu quoque fallacy, this appeal to hypocrisy against it. So, us vegans, we're not looking to live a puritanical life or cause zero harm or cause zero suffering. That is actually impossible, and it's not our objective. Our objective of vegans is to end the exploitation and the enslavement of animals, which sure causes a lot of suffering, but that's not our objective as vegans. So if someone wants to argue against veganism in a valid way, one has to argue specifically for the exploitation of animals, how that's logically consistent, how that's valid, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, those are some good points for sure. And that's why we wanted to start this episode off from the top with explaining that it's a straw man argument because a lot of people have this perception that veganism is about reducing suffering or harm reduction, about nonviolence. And part of that is our own fault, the way vegans communicate about this issue with other people in the world, online. When veganism is portrayed in this way, it's only logical to see how this argument has been, popularized and levied against veganism is because we frame it as a harm reduction or zero suffering utilitarian movement when it's not that. As Austin said, it's a ethical principle that humans shouldn't exploit animals, to respect their individuality, their sentience, their interests, their preferences. It's not about reducing suffering and causing no harm to a single insect, a vole, a single rabbit. It's not that. It's just about ending the mindset that allows humans to exploit and prey on animals. And like you said, it was popularized by Ted Nugent when he went on Joe Rogan. I've seen him clipped like thousands of times and put on Instagram Reels, put on TikTok, saying like, oh, billions, trillions of animals and insects are killed for like, 1 acre of corn, just like this ridiculous hyperbole, because that makes the argument seem stronger if it's like so many animals, when of course it's over exaggerated and it's never that many animals are being killed for like crop harvesting, wheat, corn, soy, and such. So that's why we wanted to start it off and just say right from the top, it's a straw man. It's not an argument against veganism. So the next point that I want to go into is it's a line of argument that I've used in the past, and Austin, you can maybe speak on this as well. It's a point that many vegans have used in response to this argument, and it basically goes, the amount of crop deaths that would occur are much higher in a food system involving animal agriculture than a food system just involving plant agriculture to feed a worldwide population of vegans. Because of course animals don't grow on trees, they require energy inputs, they require calories, they require crops to be fed to them so that they can grow. So when you factor in, how much land and water is being used to feed and sustain billions of animals, whether that be chickens, cows, pigs, rabbits, what have you, it's just way more crops that are being involved. So then because there's more cropland being used, there's going to be more crop deaths. If the person bringing this argument up cares about crop deaths, then it's going to be way more in an animal agricultural food system. Now, the issue with this line of reasoning is that it basically does go back to the previous point. It kind of frames veganism as a utilitarian harm reduction strategy where, well, look, veganism causes less suffering than this, so it's better. But that's not what veganism is. It's miscommunicating what it is. And this is why I personally avoid using this line of argument. I just try to stick to, putting the pressure on them. Like, how do you justify exploiting animals? How do you justify viewing animals as a resource for you to prey on and to eat them and to shit them out? Like, how do you justify that? When you bring it into the utilitarian kind of sphere, it just muddies the waters, and it makes it like this mental masturbation, like calculation, where you think about who's causing less suffering. It doesn't get at the core of the issue, because someone could just respond, well, I'm just going to buy chickens and have them on my property and just kill them and eat them. Like, I'm not causing any crop deaths, so I'm better than vegans. So it's like, you're not getting to the core of the issue when you use this kind of utilitarian, more suffering is caused in this scenario than this one. So I personally don't really use it anymore. And I would suggest, if you're talking to someone who's a pure utilitarian and they just aren't convinced by deontological arguments, by the exploitation thing, then I can maybe see it being justifiable to use it to that specific type of person. But in general, I don't use this kind of reasoning. What are your thoughts on that, Austin?
Yeah, well said. And I use this type of argumentation massively in the past. Like, I spent hours and hours and hours debating with people, arguing, outreaching, and going through these utilitarian calculations. And I think a lot of vegan activists have done this, especially when they're first starting out, because we have a good foundation, to stand on when it comes to the empirics of it. Because we can go on, for example, like animalvisuals.com, which I'm sure many of us have done, and looked and saw, okay, there's like 250 chickens killed per million calories versus, like, for example, less than 5 animals killed within crop deaths for grain production or fruit production, something like this. So empirically, from this utilitarian perspective, it makes sense, to an activist. Now, the problem with this is it doesn't actually address what we're looking to do, and we're arguing from their framework. And their framework, of course, isn't vegan. So we've already forfeited our actual position when we argue from their framework, because this is just not compatible with what veganism actually is. When we lose our metaphysical framework for veganism and we argue on their terms, we're actually misrepresenting what veganism is. Because our position isn't, oh, we should mitigate harm. It's, we should stop viewing animals as a resource, as an object, as a commodity, and we need to start abolishing this. We need to start treating them with basic value, basic respect, to not see them, as a unit of production. So when we argue from this perspective, from this deontological framework, we just forego this type of argument completely. All right, and that leads me to my next point, and that is that the deaths within crop agriculture do not equate to animal agriculture. And the reason why is that industrial deaths don't create a valid basis for exploiting others. And let's look at it this way. If you look at all of humanity's global industries, construction, transportation, agriculture, manufacturing, processing, over 3 million humans die per year within workplace accidents or within their industry. That's a massive number of humans. That's more humans than the number that die within wars or are murdered. Yet we don't take this fact that humans die within various industries as an argument, a valid argument, to enslave humans or to murder humans or to use humans in some kind of bizarre medical experiments or testing or anything of this nature, right? So industrial deaths don't create a valid moral basis for exploiting others. Like, imagine this scenario. Someone says, or they're before a judge in a court of law, and they said, Your Honor, it was okay for me to enslave and breed and eat these people because humans die within workplace accidents. That's actually insane, and that's the argument that people are using to enslave animals. And then I would ask these people, what is the trait difference between animals and humans that justifies this line of reasoning being applied to animals but not to humans? There is no trait that actually changes the logic. That somehow, okay, there's deaths within industry, therefore we can enslave and consume humans. And by the way, just to make the point, humans die within agriculture. Humans die within both animal and plant agriculture. People die too in any form of manufacturing. Does that create a basis for enslaving and eating humans? Absolutely not. So it doesn't apply to animals. What do you think about that, Chris?
Yeah, that's a great point. A great analogy that I like to bring up whenever I hear this argument. When you look at these different industries around the world, their goal is to create utility, whether that be construction, building buildings, building roadways, to increase utility in society. You look at transportation, these industries exist to create a specific desired goal. And in the process of that, unfortunately, humans who work there, humans who are maybe not working there, they do incidentally die as a result, a certain amount every year. But that's not the goal of the practice. So similarly with crop agriculture, the goal is to procure crops to feed humans, to create utility for society. And the unfortunate consequence of that is that sometimes animals are killed during crop harvesting, land clearing, and such. Now, just like Austin said, that does not justify human exploitation. It doesn't justify animal exploitation either. So just because beings are harmed or killed in industry, that doesn't therefore justify the systematic, breeding, confinement, exploitation, and slaughter of animals. The mindset that they are resources for us. It's completely a non sequitur. It doesn't follow from the other. And when you put it in the human context, like Austin did, it just doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense. We can, if you're looking at this genuinely and you're not being like a sophist, you can see there's a clear moral difference between industry deaths, whether that be human or animal, and then a system like animal agriculture, where animals are being viewed as property, resources. They have their rights stripped away. They have no respect or care given to their basic interests to live and enjoy their lives. There's a complete moral difference between the two, and it's very clear to see when you put it in that analogy. And I really like what you said about, let's say Jeffrey Dahmer, he's in the courtroom, right? And the judge is asking him, how can you justify your actions of preying on these humans and exploiting them and killing them and eating them? And it would totally not hold up in court if he said, well, you cause human deaths with purchasing your computer or driving on the roads and stuff like that. That's fine what I did. Like, when you put it in that context, I really like that courtroom analogy, and it's something I like to keep for future conversations where this comes up. So that'll segue us to the next point. So the next point is that it's only vegans who actually seek to abolish exploitation. So it's only vegans that actually care about animals enough to really hit the streets and to advocate for their interests. And it's never the non-vegans who are actually genuinely caring about the animals in crop agriculture who are dying, because their lifestyle already is being supported by preying on and exploiting and killing thousands of animals per year. Like, they already don't give them enough moral worth to lift their finger to go vegan. So it's only vegans that will actually care enough about animals to, get crop debts to go away through veganic farming, hydroponic farming, and abolishing animal agriculture, which is, of course, the main cause of most of farmland use on the world, in the planet. Most of the monocrop farming is going toward animal agriculture. So it's only vegans who actually care enough about crop debts to get them to go away by moving toward veganic farming, getting away from animal agriculture, which will mitigate almost all of the monocrop farming that's going on. So it's only genuine from one side. It's never the other side who brings this up as a gotcha to the vegans. What do you think about that, Austin?
Yeah, man, well said. And one thing that I'm thinking about too is like people use this crop that's argument against veganism, but now we have a question: do animals have moral value? If animals have moral value, your option is A, go vegan. Because if animals have moral value, well, now you already have to accept veganism. If animals don't have moral value, well, then your crop death argument is disingenuous, which of course it is. But when we argue, for veganism and abolishing the exploitation of animals, us as vegans also don't want animals to be harmed in crop production. But how can we create a basis for actually not having animals killed in crop production if the majority of farmers view animals as objects to exploit and consume, and they don't treat animals with moral value? Would a farmer who sees animals as objects for their consumption care about animals enough to actually mitigate harm to them? No. So the question then goes back to non-vegans. Why do you think animals don't have moral value? And let's say, we have two potential futures. One of them is predicated on the idea that animals have moral worth and they shouldn't be exploited or enslaved or preyed on by man. The other is that animals should be perpetually enslaved, exploited by humans, and turned into shit or in other ways violated or tormented. We have these two paths. Which path do you think genuinely will lead to a mitigation in crop deaths? Obviously, the one where animals are treated with value. And I view this as a moral virtue that could be tackled in a post-vegan society. Because right now, there is no actual driving basis within 99.9% of humans to care about animals who are harmed within crop production, as they are actively consuming them and viewing them as a resource and a prey item. So the entire argument is just disingenuous at face value. And this is because it's not an intellectually honest argument. This is an attempt to step away from responsibility, to say, oh, well, you're a hypocrite, so I'm not going to engage with you in an honest way. So it's really important to call this out, get people to accept that animals have moral value if they want to go through that line of reasoning, and then point out, well, step one is to be vegan. If you think that animals have moral value, then why exploit them? Why enslave them? Once you actually adopt that perspective, then we can talk about other things, once you're actually vegan. But if you're not actually vegan, this is a waste of time to talk about other subjects when there's a very pressing problem at hand that most people are complicit in. But yeah, that's my perspective on that. Chris, anything else you want to add? Any other closing remarks?
Yeah, I think we touched on the most important points for this, and I like what you said right there about exposing the fact that this is a deflection. It's usually just a way to avoid accountability by the non-vegan who brings it up. So it's important to show them that there is usually inconsistency within their moral framework. On one hand, they say they care about animals, they care about animals in crop agriculture. Meanwhile, they're eating steak, they're eating chicken, they're eating cheese, eggs every day, and they're causing significant violation to these animals with their purchases. And this harkens back to what we started the episode on. It's about changing the way we view animals. So once we have a society where people respect animals and truly care about them, like how can we expect to mitigate, if someone wanted to mitigate crop debts in agriculture, we would never be able to do that unless we get to a world first where animals are respected and seen as sentient beings, individuals who deserve respect, to not be commodified and exploited, killed, and turned into shit in the first place. Like, there's no hope of ever getting that without first realizing that point, that animals shouldn't be exploited by us in the first place. So yeah, I think those are some good closing remarks. And in general, I thought this one might be a longer episode for us today, but we were able to kind of say everything we needed to say. And this argument was kind of something that really loomed over me when I would engage in argumentation with people who were justifying not being vegan. This one was one that I battled with and I struggled with responding to a lot when I was earlier in my days as an activist. But hopefully with this episode, we've lined out some points for you that can help you in your activism and responding to this kind of argument. And that's all I got. Anything else from you, Austin?
Yeah, man. You have people who will watch a football game, the Super Bowl, and they'll eat, 2 dozen chicken wings, or they'll eat like a dozen shrimp, and then they'll lie to a vegan activist and act like they're concerned about crop deaths. So it's just a completely, straw man argument just to avoid accountability. And I was right there with you. I could argue from this empirical perspective, and I knew the statistics, I knew the numbers, I knew how, animal agriculture is a massive bottleneck in resources and is inherently inefficient. But when you lose focus of this framework, you subject yourself to wasting so much time going on a back and forth, going over all of these hypotheticals that still exploit animals, still view them as a resource. So when we get to this core of this subject, not only can we portray veganism as it actually is, but save so much of our time and also communicate it effectively. And I think 15, 20 seconds of education on what veganism is can prevent hours of potential argumentation. So just explaining, veganism is a principle of humans not exploiting animals, not a utilitarian or harm reduction philosophy. We can just completely, get rid of that entire pathway while saving so much time and getting people to actually understand what veganism is. And that's been my experience, since I've been doing that. So anyone who's made it this far, share your thoughts, ideas. Thank you for tuning in. We appreciate it. Have a good one. Peace.
Thank you.